We are in seminar 1. We have been talking about a number of issues: ego psychology, narcissism, discussing clinical cases. Today we're going to talk about the lecture on March 24th, 1954. The lecture has the title, The Two Narcissisms. Lacan does a lot in these pages. Begins with Freud, passes through Jung, biology, ethology, animal mating, optical experiments, the mirror stage, the ego ideal, love, hypnosis, psychosis. It's all in 15, 20 pages. So it's very easy to lose the thread. I would say that the thread is this, that Lacan wants to show that narcissism provides the structure for reality and for the ego to be organized. And this is a very strange idea, especially if you think about narcissism in contemporary terms, right? Because in ordinary language, narcissism means vanity. A person talks about himself or herself too much, needs admiration, cannot listen, cannot love others except as extensions of himself. But Lacan here is following Freud in using the term in a very different sense. It is a sense of narcissism that has to do more with basic, foundational psychological processes. So the easier thing here is to think about babies. Before the baby can say I, or can say her name, or before she can tell a coherent story about herself, before she invests in the world, there has to be some form of bodily unity. This is what both Freud and Lacan think. The body has to be gathered into an image. The subject has to see herself as one. And so primary narcissism is this moment at which the image of the body is formed. So if we think about a baby, before this unification, the baby experience is not yet organized around a stable body image. There are sensations, there are physical needs, hunger, movements, images, the warmth of human contact, sometimes discomfort, partial objects like the mother's voice, the breast, the gaze. But at some point, Lacan says, something happens. The body is grasped as a whole. And Lacan explains this unification with his theory of the mirror stage. So the child sees an image in the mirror and recognizes this image is myself, recognizes herself in the mirror. And we're talking about a child that is still immature, cannot coordinate her movements completely, still depends on adults. So she's still fragmented in her bodily experience. But maybe when she's around 1 year old, she sees herself in the mirror as one. And this image is already complete. And this is like the first great trick of the imaginary. The image gives unity in advance. Lacan says this is not simply a reflection, it is an anticipation. So the child, before having conquered a coordinated unity in her actual experience, she sees herself from the outside. In the mirror, she sees herself from the outside as a whole. And this image becomes the basis for the ego. So one consequence of this is that then this means that the ego is not like the deepest truth of the subject. The ego is not something like already forms, like an internal substance. The ego is completely based on an external image. It's a construction. The subject is alienated in this image. This means that we define ourselves through others. We find ourselves in images that are outside ourselves. We find ourselves in a mirror image in identifications. Maybe when you are a 1 year old, you find yourself in a mirror, but then you find yourself in your friends, in your parents, in idols like movie stars. all the possible models one identifies with. So we are alienated in these images. At the beginning of this session, there is a big controversy with Jung, with Carl Jung. Lacan says that when Freud wrote his essay on narcissism, he was in a controversy with Jung. Freud's article on narcissism is written in 1914 against Jung. Jung was proposing a very broad conception of libido. For Jung, libido is like a general psychic energy. This energy can move into images, myths, archetypes, religious symbols. It's like a vital force. And Lacan calls this a kind of psychic pantheism. Everything becomes libido. Everything is one energy that is like moving, wearing different masks. And Freud resists this version. For Freud, libido is tied to sexuality. Freud wants to keep two kinds of drive apart. He uses the German word for the ego drives, Ich-Triebe. So there are these drives that are oriented towards self-preservation. This is, let's say, the business of staying alive. And separate from that, there are the sexual drives, libido proper. Freud says we should not melt both into just one substance. They are actually in conflict with each other, the ego drives and the sexual drives. And this has to do even with the history of psychoanalysis, because Freud started working with neurotics, with obsessive neurotics, with hysterics. And his theory was that in neurosis, the symptom is a disguised form of sexual satisfaction. For example, there is one article, a short article by Freud. He talks about a woman that has this ritual. She uses a tablecloth that has a stain on it. And she has this obsessive ritual that every day she needs to make sure that the maid notices the stain. And she doesn't know why she does this. Freud analyzes this symptom, and by free association, she goes back to a memory from her wedding night that she was with her husband, newly wed husband, in the room in a hotel, and they were not able to have sexual intercourse. They were not able to consummate the marriage. And she was very ashamed about this. In the morning, she was thinking about creating a stain in the sheets, in the bed sheets, so that the people at the hotel believe that there was sex, that the marriage was consummated, right? So this is the repressed sexual memory, and this returns as this obsessive ritual. Now the bed sheets are substituted for the tablecloth, and the maid at the hotel is also substituted by her current maid. The reason I'm telling you this is because this is an example of how, when you're analyzing a neurotic symptom, you tend to find these repressed sexual meanings. So sexual libido, not just the general libido. If libido meant, like Jung wants, some kind of sexual energy in general, it loses power. Freud gives the example of a man that is trying to prove that he has the right to inherit some land by arguing that we all come from common ancestors. So we are all related in humanity, so I should inherit this land, right? So this example is to say that a concept that explains everything, like Jung's libido, for Freud explains nothing. It has to be specific. So he wants to maintain this distinction between self-preservation drives and sexual libido. When Freud is writing this article on narcissism, he's working on psychosis. And Jung's theory of psychosis is that in psychosis, the libido is introverted. So it withdraws from the world and it turns back into the subject's inner space. And so the external reality for the psychotic, for the paranoid, for the schizophrenic, the external reality fades away. It's like a twilight of reality. In Jung's version, the neurotic and the psychotic operate with the same mechanism of withdrawing libido from reality. And it's a quantitative difference. So the psychotic simply has more introversion of libido than the neurotic. Lacan's position is, of course, with Freud and against Jung. Lacan also believes we need to preserve this distinction between sexual drives and ego drives. Sexual drives concern libidinal satisfaction. Ego drives concern self-preservation. Hunger is not the same as desire. Nutrition is not the same as love. Biological survival is not the same as sexuality. At that point in the lecture, Lacan makes a detour through animals. He refers to ethology. Ethology is a discipline that studies animal behavior. And he uses the example of the stickleback fish. When the stickleback male is displaying certain color markings on its belly, it triggers the sexual behavior of the female. But the remarkable thing here is that you can use a cardboard cutout, badly made. If it has the right markings, it can produce the same effect. It triggers the sexual behavior of the female. So the animal is responding to a signal, to an image. This is why Lacan says that sexual behavior is prone to the lure. Lure, L-U-R-E, right? So cardboard cutout can turn you on if it has the right markings. A lure is not alive. It's an image that captures behavior. And actually fishers use fishing lures. It is not a fish, but it has enough of the form or color or shine to trigger another fish biting it. So the fish is caught by an image. And there are hundreds of examples of this in nature. We are turned on by images all the time. This is why we dress up. Lacan is saying that sexuality is not governed by biological need. It is mediated by images. It is mediated by words, signifiers, gestures, like a certain look, a certain voice can capture desire. This is true about animals to a certain extent, but it is true for humans in a much more dramatic way. Then he makes a strange comparison there. He talks about how you start a car. So you turn the key and the whole engine of sexual behavior starts. The point is the same, that what sets the sexual machine in motion is an image, is the imaginary. In these pages, he engages in a discussion with the neo-Freudians that have a version according to which there is like a healthy emotional development until you reach maturity, and maturity is characterized by genital sexuality and adaptation to reality. And this narrative with mature love and genital sex as the endpoint, as the crown of adult adjustment, is exactly what Lacan is opposing. He's saying this is reading Freud wrong. Freud is not saying this. We have the example of animals. For animals, the world is organized in a relatively fixed manner. Lacan here uses another German word, Umwelt. Welt is world. Is a prefix that means around. So Umwelt is the surrounding world, the environment. If you think like the bird, the fish, the dog, each lives in a world that is structured by signals. He says by correspondences between the signal and how you react. Still, we're not talking about a neutral, objective world in general, but about a world that matters for that organism. The animal is fitted to a specific and stable environment. But human beings are different because we're not adapted to one closed Umwelt in the same way. We're not adapted to one closed environment. Our relation to the world is mediated by images and by language. And this symbolic and imaginary world is what organizes who we are, our identity, our desire, our rivalries, love, shame, the structure of reality itself. Now we go back to our beloved optic experiment. In the classic experiment, the real flowers are, if you can see the mouse, are here. These are the real flowers under the box or hidden in the box. On the box, there's only the vase. The flowers are not there. But if your eyes are here, this is the subject, and the subject is at the right position, these flowers in the box are reflected in the concave, the curved mirror, and they appear to the subject as if they were here. This is the optical illusion, as if they were in the vase. So one more step, technical terms. The flowers that are in the box are the real object. Now, virtual image, what is it? This is what we see in a flat mirror. When the mirror is plane, we see things not in our space, in our reality, but on the other side of the mirror. Now you're seeing me as a virtual image. I'm not in your space. But the flowers, they are reflected in this curved mirror and appear as if they were in the vase. They are like a hologram. They are part of the real space. So Lacan calls this a real image. Actually, physics calls this real images, optics. Now, it gets more complicated. Here we have two changes. First change, now Lacan is placing the vase under the table or hidden in the box, and the flowers on top. This is a metaphor because he wants the vase to represent the body. What is our body? It's an empty container. And we can remember about the cases we discussed. Dick, Robert, all this process of constituting their own body with these boundaries, what is outside, what is in my body, creating a unity of these fragmented parts, these kids that they're in this arrested psychological development that had to work on therapy to constitute these basic differentiations. But this is the process we all go through. So our body, this imaginary container that gives us consistency, that allows us to say, that's me. Right? This is who I am. Lacan is placing this as something that is constituted through a reflection, through an image, a real image. And on top, he puts the flowers, and the flowers represent everything that is multifarious in us, everything that is a collection of things, and things are assembled in us. Like we have drives, and we have parts of our body that produce pain or pleasure. There are several words or signifiers that define who we are. So all these different aspects, this collection, this bunch of things, this bouquet that we are in this position of being the real object. Right? So forget about the plane mirror. Let's say if you see my mouse, if our eyes were here, where the mouse is, where the pointer is, right? If we were looking from this position, if we were at the right place, we have the first experiment. We're seeing the flowers inside the vase. One more step he takes is that now he places a plane mirror here. And let me tell you this in advance. The plane mirror represents the other. the other. And now the subject is on the upper left, where the I is. We see ourselves through the other. We don't see ourselves directly. We see this virtual image. So if I am in this position where the I is, what do I see in the plane mirror? I see myself, my own face, right? And I also see the flowers in the vase. But now they're really undistinguishable. Like I cannot tell what is a real image, a virtual image, because they are mediated through the other. They are mediated through this reflection in the mirror, in where I see just one unified composition. I don't see this extra step of the vase being reflected in the concave mirror and then appearing on the table. I'm seeing the image on the plane mirror, so I'm seeing through the other, I'm seeing my own body and everything that constitutes me, my drives, my desires. What we see is what is on the right, this virtual image on the right. Through the other, we see ourselves as whole, as the vase with the flowers, with everything put together. The real image on the right. This is what we see, how we perceive ourselves. He says that the schema is an elaboration of what he has been trying to explain for years with the mirror stage. So the whole apparatus is a model of the mirror stage. The unity we feel in our own body is not a fact that we are born with. It is an image assembled at the right angle. If the flat mirror were misplaced, if the other is failing you, if the other is not there for you, then you don't see yourself. The ego is not a substance. It's not like a little person hidden inside you. It's more like an image produced by a certain arrangement. If mirrors are placed in the right way, the image appears coherent. If they're placed differently, the image does not appear the same way. So clinically, a patient may seem like very coherent in one relationship, let's say with his girlfriend, and fall apart in another relationship with his boss, for example. A person may feel intelligent in one social field and stupid in another. A woman might feel beautiful with one lover and disgusting with another. A man will feel generous with his children and humiliated in relation to his father. So the point is this: the ego is not simply there. It's supported by relations, images, mirrors, ideals. The subject's reality depends on a point of view, but we should not interpret this in a common sense way, like in the sense of, oh, perspective is important, or everyone has his or her own perspective. In a deeper sense, that the subject's world is organized from the place he occupies in the symbolic world, in his relation to the other. Let's read directly from Lacan. First of all, there is, in fact, a narcissism connected with the corporeal image. This image is identical for the entirety of the subject's mechanisms and gives his Umwelt, his environment, its form, inasmuch as he is a man and not a horse. It makes up the unity of the subject, and we see it projecting itself in 1,000 different ways, up to and including what we can call the imaginary source of symbolism, which is what links symbolism to feeling, to the Selbstgefühl, which the human being, the Mensch, has of his own body. This initial narcissism is to be found, if you wish, on the level of the real image in my schema, insofar as it makes possible the organization of the totality of reality into a limited number of preformed frameworks. These are the moments in which we feel like throwing the book through the window, right? So, one point, as the title of the lecture says, is that there are two narcissisms. The first narcissism is the one of the corporeal image. This means the image of the body as a whole. This is the first schema. The first narcissism, we can exemplify it with this. except that it would be better to have the vase inside the box, the vase under, and the flowers on top. But it's the idea of conquering this unity. That's the first narcissism. The image gives unity to the subject, and also it gives form to the subject's world. So, for example, your space is not neutral. You don't live in some kind of Euclidean 3D space. You orient yourself in the world because you have a body. You have these orientations of forward and backwards and up and down, inside and outside you. Again, this was at stake in the cases we discussed of Dick and Robert. The world of a child that is learning to walk, for example, is different from the world of an adult. So the world of someone with chronic pain is different from the world of someone who feels strong. The body image organizes the world. The first narcissism is about the body image that gives the subject the form, and it provides a framework for reality. Lacan says that this image is the imaginary source of symbolism. This is a strange phrase because at this stage of Lacan's work, we tend to think that the symbolic is more important than the imaginary. But yet, here he's saying that the imaginary is providing the source of the symbolic. So words are not floating abstractions. Words, symbols, have affect. They are affectively charged. They are rooted in our body, in our lived, embodied experience. If you think about a patient who says, "Oh, when he called me stupid, I felt small." This is not a metaphor that he adds afterward to explain. He actually felt small. So the bodily image of feeling small is the source of what is articulated in this social scene, in this social experience. There is a symbolic distinction between being big and being small. So symbolism is rooted in what he calls, in German, Selbstgefühl, like feeling of oneself, the bodily feeling of being this person, having this body. And only if we can feel as having a body, as existing in this bodily sense, as having a unified image of ourselves, then we can enter the symbolic world. Only if we have this can words make sense for us. So this is the first narcissism, the body as image, the image of the body as a unity, and this unity as a framework for reality, for the world at large. Let's move to the second narcissism. Again, I will read from Lacan. He says, in man, by contrast, the reflection in the mirror indicates an original noetic possibility and introduces a second narcissism. Its fundamental pattern is immediately the relation to the other. So, first narcissism, first optical schema, constitution of the body. Second narcissism, we're adding the flat mirror, the plane mirror, and with that we are adding the other. And what we have now is the relation with the other. Noetic is a Greek word that refers to knowledge, understanding. So the mirror does not only give the child that sees himself in the mirror a visual image. It opens the possibility that he can take himself as an object. He can now think about himself, talk about himself, reflect about himself, and he can see himself from the place of the other. Let's imagine that his mom is there telling him that he's really beautiful or that he's taller. So he can relate to himself through an image that is outside him. So the second narcissism is no longer only about the body image. It's the relation to the other through the image. And this makes the other have like a captivating value, because the other also appears as a complete image. So the other seems to possess the unity that I see. Let's imagine a child starting to walk, and he sees others walking, speaking. He is playing with another kid. The other kid wants a toy. If you see like a 1-year-old child playing with a toy, he's not interested in the toy, but another 1-year-old comes and wants this toy, what's going to happen to the first child? Identification. Now I want that toy. The other becomes a mirror in which I locate my own being, my own desire. Later, Lacan will say desire is the desire of the other. We identify with others. The child wants to be like his older brother, or wants to be the father, or wants to be the teacher, the athlete, the actress. And the ego forms itself through these identifications. And this is secondary narcissism. And hand in hand with admiration, we have competition, rivalry. The other is not only loved, the other is also threatening. The other has the image that I want for myself. The other occupies the place that I desire. The other seems complete where I feel lacking. So there are points in his work where he says something that makes me laugh. The ego is paranoid. What Lacan says about the ego is that the ego is paranoid. You can contrast this with this model of the perfect, developing, mature ego who can adapt to reality and be objective about reality and have mature sexuality organized through genitality. Lacan is saying, actually, the ego has a paranoid structure. One more German word, Ich-Ideal, the ego ideal. Lacan says that the other, the alter ego, the other person, is mixed with the ego ideal. The ego ideal is a psychological instance that emerges when you are able to abandon primary narcissism. So you abandon this ideal image of yourself, but you still preserve like some kind of aspiration of what you would like to become. How it would be to be perfect. And this is the ego ideal. What we see in our practice in psychoanalysis is that the person you love, or your analyst, or your teacher, or your political leader, or Lionel Messi, they can become figures through whom you see what you would like to become, what you would like to be. The subject sees his own being in this relation to the other. His libidinal being, not his being in general. So this is not philosophy. We're not talking about ontology, about reality in an abstract way. This is not what I am in, like Descartes would talk about, I think, therefore I am. This is what I am in the sense of what I am as loved, as desired, as admired, as humiliated, as rejected, as in competition, as exposed. So my being is libidinal because it is invested, is charged with desire. This is the first thing that Freud says in the article on narcissism. Probably the most important thing that he says is, I realize, says Freud, that libido is not only attaching to external objects. It's not only that I love things, or I love my work, or I love this music. I also can love myself, my own ego. And this creates actually some tension in the discussion with Jung, because Jung could say, oh, you're saying the same as me. It's just one libido and can go to the object or to the self. And Freud says, no, I am not saying the same. I'm saying this is sexual energy. Is libido, sexual libido, going back into the ego. And this is what we call narcissism. I'll say it once more because I think it's important. First, narcissism, the narcissism of corporeal image. It gives unity to the body. It organizes reality into a stable framework. It is connected to the body as a total form. And the second narcissism is the narcissism of identification with the other. The subject sees his being as reflected on the other, and the other is related to the ego ideal. And this is the narcissism of fascination and love. And when we fall in love and we idealize the object of our love, he or she is the greatest person I've ever met. But also the other side of the coin, this is also the narcissism of rivalry and competition and aggression, wanting to destroy the other. The first narcissism gives us coherence. The second narcissism introduces alienation. The first narcissism organizes reality. The second organizes desire in relation to the other. Now, he's analyzing both from the point of view of the imaginary. Imaginary in the sense that they operate through images, through forms, through identifications that can capture us, these images. The last thing I want to say, this is a first very important step in Lacan's approach to love. Let me read it from him. The exact equivalence of the object and the ego ideal in the love relation. So the exact equivalence of the object and the ego ideal. I'm in love with my girlfriend. My girlfriend is idealized by me. But this shows that this is not only object libido, this is narcissistic libido, because I'm putting her in the place of the ego ideal. She's completing me with her perfection. She's making me perfect through her perfection. It's narcissistic at bottom. So the exact equivalence of the object and the ego ideal in the love relation is one of the most fundamental notions in Freud's work, says Lacan. The loved object, when invested in love, is, through its captative effect on the subject, strictly equivalent to the ego ideal. This is the heart of the lecture. When we fall in love, we often believe that we are simply loving an other, but Lacan says, watch out, be careful. The loved object occupies the place of the ego ideal. The beloved is not merely another subject. If the second narcissism is an identification with an other, and this other is my ego ideal, then love itself has the same structure. Love is built on the mirror. The beloved becomes an image through which I encounter my own ideal being. Love, in a sense, and this is very controversial, he's saying love, in a sense, is always narcissistic. So Seinfeld is always falling in love or having some enthusiasm for the girls he's dating, but he always finds a flaw. He always finds a defect. This girl is just perfect, except that when he laughs, he makes the wrong noise. Or this girl is perfect, but her hands are too big. And there is one episode in which when he sees the girlfriend with the front light, she's beautiful. But if the light is on the side of her face, then she's awful. She's very ugly. These are two sides of the same coin. You over-idealize this person. You see him or her as perfect, but then you are hyper-focused on flaws. You cannot tolerate the defect. So this overestimation and this fixation on the flaws of the beloved are not an accident. This is love with its narcissistic engine. It's not just an attachment to another person, it's a complete reorganization of the ego. You feel different when you're in love. You feel, for example, sometimes more successful or more beautiful or more intelligent or more alive. The world brightens. What clothes you are wearing matters, music matters, the body feels different, the future opens up. So the beloved is not only adding pleasure to your life, it's giving you an image of yourself. Narcissistic. And of course, this is why when the person you love abandons you, it's a catastrophe. Not only because you miss that person, because your ego is losing support for his or her own ego ideal. Now you feel diminished, ugly, stupid, even unreal. Even when everything goes well, Lacan says that love is a psychological catastrophe. It's a catastrophe because the ego is made dependent, destabilized by this fascination with the other. And of course, this is very important in the seminar, which is, sometimes we forget, but this is about the technical writings of Freud. This is about psychoanalytic technique. And this applies to transference love. So you need always to remember as an analyst, and this is the hardest part, I think, of being an analyst. This person that loves me does not love me for the person I am, does not love me for how good a therapist I am. It's just because the place I'm occupying. This is an asymmetric relation in which the patient sometimes is hoping to be recognized, improved, completed, authorized, saved. So the analyst is occupying the place also of the ego ideal. Transference love is not just an emotion, it's a narcissistic structure. If you want to do psychoanalysis, you should be on alert. You should know that our mission is not to replace some ego ideal that the client brings with our own ideal. This is where it connects with hypnosis and suggestion. This is how he ends this lecture, saying, we shouldn't do this. This is not the ethics of psychoanalysis. The ethic of psychoanalysis is to help this subject to find his or her own voice, her own desire, her process, and not to impose a normative ideal.